What is a creepy story you haven't told many people? When I was a preteen, I liked to rearrange my room a lot. This one particular time I moved my bed up against my wall facing the door to the hallway, then I put the TV on the adjacent wall but facing at an angle so I could see it head on from my bed. Well, one night I had my light on and was watching a show. I go to turn the light off and lay in my bed. I then noticed on the one wall in the room that was blank, a shadow of a figure with a head and almost a full set of shoulders. It was about halfway up the wall, a little taller than I was at the time. I was just staring at it. I couldn't move. I finally got the courage to get up a little bit and see if anything was casting the shadow, but since I just rearranged the room, there was nothing between my TV and my bed. I put my hand out and it cast a shadow next to the head. I put my head up and it cast a shadow on the wall next to the other shadow too. But that shadow didn't move. I finally got up and turned the light on, then back off and the shadow was gone. Craziest thing ever. I immediately switched my room again and never saw it happen again. Sister, mother and I rented a holiday home that used to be an old coach house in Cape Town. My sister decided to go out with friends for the night. Later that evening we were getting ready to eat when we hear my sister's voice calling out to us to come to her room, like she wanted to show us something. My mom and I both froze, and when I eventually turned to my mother she was pale as a sheet. She said to me in a clipped tone, "Don't acknowledge it." My mother is a staunch skeptic and her reaction, I think, frightened me more than the actual voice. 1. This was over 10 years ago. I saw unexplained lights in the sky OMW home once. I was driving over a bridge and the lights were amber-colored and my brain was like, those are street lights, but as I got closer and drove under and past them I realized they were way up in the sky and were so not street lights. They were in a V formation but wiggling around in place sort of as they all glided in unison through the air. The V wasn't moving at its point though, it was drifting sideways. I know the lights were individual because I could see the sky and clouds behind them. Completely silent, it was nighttime, I was alone on the road. 2. Saw some dude hiding in a bush at the library. We made eye contact with each other but I barely reacted and hustled my ass home. Don't ask me why I reacted like that, I was a stupid scared kid. 3. Took a road trip in February many years ago to visit a friend and slept at a rest station in Ohio at night. I was freezing trying to sleep in my car so I pulled my beanie over my eyes to keep warm. I was desperate. I reclined and passed out. I woke up suddenly and pulled my hat up and some guy had froze mid-step walking towards my car. He was a foot away from the side mirror on my side of the car, his hands were in front of his body as if he were trying to walk gingerly, his eyes were wide and he quickly turned around and bolted into the bathroom when I started to sit up. Needless to say I didn't sleep for the rest of the drive. I forgot about it after that trip, oddly enough, only remembering it a couple years later. When I was about 11, I was home alone at night. I was walking from the kitchen to the stairway to head upstairs, and along the way, I had to pass the front door, which had windows on either side of it. As I was just starting up the stairs, there was a violent pounding on the front door, which was locked. I turned around to see a man outside pounding very forcefully and angrily on the door. He was wearing a black ski mask. To this day, I honestly cannot explain my behavior, but I just looked at him for a moment, and he looked at me, and then I slowly walked up the stairs as though nothing had happened. I didn't feel scared, just indifferent, like I knew nothing would come of it. The pounding stopped shortly after, and I never even told my parents about this when they got home. I don't know if I've ever told anyone, actually. I was walking home from the pub in my small town with my boyfriend and 3 friends. It was around midnight in the middle of the summer, and while we had had a drink or so each we weren't drunk and were just chatting or looking at the stars. The particular bit of road we were on isn't very long but is quite old and narrow, so the pavements thin out a lot. We were walking in either twos or single file and to my right was a thick garden hedge. As this road is also along a hill, many of the gardens drop down a lot or have steep paths winding down to their front doors. Essentially to my right there was mostly hedge over this drop and not a lot else. At one of the breaks in the hedge where a front gate stood, in the corner of my eye I noticed something. It wasn't visible until the last moment, but as I passed the gate I saw it out of the corner of my eye. I saw an old bearded man standing there at the gate staring out like a statue. He facing out towards the pavement and almost flush with the hedge. But that wasn't the weird part. As I passed this man, only a few inches from my face, I realized he was wearing what looked like a bright yellow fisherman's hat. I passed him for maybe a few seconds and then, gone. As we filed past there was a lull in conversation and I felt myself shudder. Nobody else said anything, but it was such a strange encounter that I couldn't shake it off for a bit. There was no reason for him to be stood there at midnight and he never moved. Even his expression was fixed and staring forward. We hadn't been making enough noise for someone to come out of their house to see what the fuss was or anything, and he had been so close when we all passed by. It was just so bizarre. The conversation struck back up again once the pavement became a little wider and we could walk alongside each other again. I started to relax and felt a bit more normal again. I wondered almost if I had imagined it until around 5 minutes later and much further on our way my friend asked me, "Did you see that guy earlier?" A few years ago I was walking through the woods off the beaten track a bit and I smelt this really overpowering sweet smell. Being nosy, I pulled back the undergrowth to have a look and found a dead body. The guy had clearly been there a while and wasn't looking great, all swollen and green and black with various runny bits. The local wildlife had also been dining well for a few days. I called the police, who told me to wait with the body until they arrived. Being in the middle of nowhere, it took a while for them to arrive and it got dark and I was just sat there in the dark with him for a long time. It turned out he had committed suicide. For a long time afterwards I had dreams about him and he would talk to me and not nice things. Mainly about how he was angry I had disturbed his resting place and he wanted me to kill myself. Probably just my imagination, but all pretty disturbing at the time. He still turns up in my dreams from time to time and no doubt will be tonight after typing this. My mom worked a lot at night, so we were by ourselves quite often. There was 5 of us in all, 2 older brothers, 2 little sisters and me right in the middle. I was around 8 to 9 years old when this happened, so my brothers would have been around 14 to 13 and my sisters are only 13 months younger than me. We lived in a crappy apartment in a bad neighborhood, and when we were bored we'd play our version of hide and seek. It involved turning off every light in the house, seeker given a flashlight, and as you're looking you get to call out whistle 3 times and everyone had to whistle from their hiding spot. I was bad at hiding, so I preferred it. We were just starting the game and it was storming outside, thunder and lightning going off. Not our best idea in hindsight, but we aren't what I'd call a bright group. To do this I need to explain the layout of the downstairs. The front door was right next to the stairs. 2 paths, one leads you directly to the kitchen, the other into the living room. We had 2 couches, one against the wall next to a door that lead to the back of the apartment buildings, the other with its back facing the dining room with another wider opening to the kitchen. I found my oldest brother fairly quickly because he used the opportunity to pop out from around the corner and scare me. After a few minutes I called out, "Okay, whistle." I was confused when I heard 4 distinct whistles and I looked at my bro who was sitting on the couch. "Why'd you whistle?" He looked at me equally confused. "I didn't." I pointed the flashlight at him and called out, "Whistle again," and my blood turned to ice when I again heard 4 whistles and my brother didn't open his mouth. I saw the color drain from his face as he heard it. He stood, walked over to the living room light and turned it on as he ordered, "Everyone come out right now." My other brother popped up from behind the couch. My sister climbed out from under the table. My last very thin, very tiny sister stood up from behind a large plant on the floor. We gathered in the living room unsure of what to do, so I decided to call out once more, "Okay, whistle again." A whistle came from the still dark kitchen. We looked at each other, my younger sisters clinging to each other as we as one crept towards the kitchen. We were barely leaning in the doorway, my brother's hand reaching for the switch. When I lifted the still-lit flashlight to the opening that led to the front door and screamed, everyone else joining in a split second later as we took in the sight of an absolutely psychotic-looking junkie homeless person crouched in the opening smiling at us. His mouth seemed stretched unnaturally wide, on his face flashing rotten blackened teeth, his bloodshot eyes flashing in the light, his dirty brown hair hanging in tangled knots on his head, his hands grasped in front of him. His hands were fucking filthy and bleeding. I couldn't really see his outfit from how he was crouched over, but he wasn't wearing any shoes and all his toes were missing their nails and were steadily turning this nasty greenish yellow from infection. He screamed right as we screamed, which only made him even scarier. We probably stood there a good 30 seconds just screaming our heads off. When he lurched forward on hands and knees toward us, grunting, his eyes never blinking. In that moment I threw the flashlight full force and hit him right between the eyes. He squealed and landed on his side, clutching his head. We promptly turned and ran out the back door in the pouring rain, barefoot and in our pajamas, right to a neighbor's friend's house and pounded on their door until they opened it, to which we shoved ourselves inside and slammed the door. I was crying along with my sisters while my brothers were trying to tell them what happened, but were pretty much just screaming. They got the gist of it though and called the cops. One was always patrolling nearby and he caught the guy right as he was trying to hide by climbing into the dumpster in the parking lot. Apparently someone had lost a key to their apartment, and cause the landlord was a cheap asshole. He'd only used like 3 kinds of keys for the apartment buildings, so the homeless junkie looking for cash to buy more drugs had simply tried the key on the doors until he got to one that opened. He thought we were either asleep or not home because the lights are off, but then he saw my flashlight and tried to hide, but in his damaged mind when he realized we were playing decided to join in. Needless to say, we moved out soon after. I once dreamed I was hovering around my front yard. Everything was normal and in place, unlike most of my dreams. Then as I approached the entrance on the side of the house, I noticed the door was open. So I looked and I could see my room and me asleep there. I immediately woke up. Next thing I do is to look at that door, visible from my room, and to my surprise I noticed it was actually open. At like 3 a.m. and everything was pitch black outside. I went slowly to see if I could close it while making sure I didn't hear anyone else inside the house. Once I reached the entrance I looked outside both ways and saw nothing or heard nothing. I just closed it and went back to sleep. Thank you for watching the video. Please consider to like and subscribe and I will see you in the next one.